I saw a headline about how Hillary and Bill Clinton are going to be subpoenaed about their relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell now, as they're trying to distract away about how they're not going to release the files, which obviously have something bad for both parties in them. Otherwise, we would probably have them. But the big giveaway here about that, if the Clintons are subpoenaed and forced to testify or whatever, or if Ghislaine is asked about them, is that Republicans are not going to touch one very important aspect of the Epstein-Clinton relationship with a 10-foot pole, and that is
sex trafficking, global intelligence, and organized crime. Whitney Webb lays out the terrifying truth behind Epstein's rise and the power structure that protects him. This isn't just about Mossad or the CIA. It's about a global elite, bankers, lawyers, mobsters, who use blackmail and money to control politics, finance, and society. Webb exposes how both Trump and Clinton are tied to these networks, and how the mainstream media's obsession with the Epstein list is a distraction from the bipartisan, systemic rot at the heart of American and global power. If you want to understand the real conspiracy, this is essential viewing.
Okay, so I didn't hire Ian at all, and I haven't really had any contact with him ever. But I do appreciate that he has enjoyed my book thoroughly, but I do not agree with some of the conclusions he's had from it. So I would say, for example, that I would disagree with the conclusion that my book says only Epstein was Mossad. So I argue in the book that Epstein was Israeli military intelligence, which is an important distinction, because Israel can come out and say, we deny 100% that Epstein was Mossad, but if you need to get the right agency, because then it's not as easy for them, right? You have to anticipate smears and attacks like that when you're dealing with this kind of information. But beyond that, I also argue for a U.S. intelligence tie, which, saying Epstein was Mossad kind of glosses over that. But more importantly, I would argue than either of those things is the fact that my book really argues, and this is why Volume 1 even exists, that what we're dealing with here is not really even state agencies, it's the power structure above them. It's a transnational oligarchy that represents the union between the people that created the intelligence agencies, mostly bankers, right, and Wall Street lawyers, with organized crime, and how that continues to manifest and inform the oligarchy of today and our reality and our power structures. And so ultimately the book is very anti-duopoly. I go after both parties, and, unfortunately my feeling is that Ian promoted my work, which, obviously it's nice when people promote your work, but I kind of felt like he was sheep herding people in a way towards Trump, which I don't think my book really supports, considering that it talks a lot about Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn. There's plenty in the book that isn't favorable for Trump. And I learned, of course, after the book was published, some more stuff about Trump that I hope to put in an upcoming second edition of One Nation Under Blackmail, like that he became the controlling shareholder of Resorts International, which was formerly Mary Carter Paint Company, very notorious mob-linked, CIA-linked company. That's the same year he took over, or he bought Adnan Khashoggi's yacht, which I note in the book had been used for blackmail purposes by Khashoggi, who, of course, in that time also had ties to Epstein. That Roy Cohn, Trump's mentor, basically but was intimately involved with, sexual blackmail activities at the Plaza Hotel, which after Cohn dies, Trump also buys. And there's allegations of similar-ish things, though slightly different, happening at the Plaza Hotel in that period. And of course, Trump is hanging out, as noted in the book, on Robert Maxwell's yacht in the late 1980s or so, around a host of other figures who were controversial, like the Senator John Tower, who was an accomplice to Robert Maxwell in the Promise software scandal, Steve Ross, who created what is now, I guess, Time Warner out of an organized crime-linked front company that was operating some sort of garage, I believe, that he took over. And I forget who else is in the picture. Oh, Mike Wallace, Chris Wallace's father, the well-known journalist of that era, all in the same picture. Of course, a few years after that, Trump is bailed out by the Rothschild banking interests. Wilbur Ross was assisting that. and Robert Maxwell's own entry into the U.S., New York City in particular, was prompted by his affiliation with the Rothschild Bank that was opened in the 1980s on Wall Street that was aiming to do mergers and acquisitions. And they picked three people. I forget the third guy, but he was a friend of Maxwell's. But the two other guys were Jimmy Goldsmith, a famous corporate raider of the era and who's related to the Rothschilds, and then Robert Maxwell. And of course, Maxwell and Goldsmith, as I note in the book, have, were in the same social circles going back to this entity called the Claremont Club, which was linked to British intelligence and organized crime and also sex blackmail activities, and included some of these figures that are not, I don't think Maxwell's portrayed in it, but I know Goldsmith and some of these other people like Tiny Roland are in Adam Curtis's documentary series, The Mayfair Set. Which is recommended viewing if you'd like to know that these people are rather worthy of scrutiny. And it's worth pointing out, too, that, involving Epstein overlap, the earliest interaction with Epstein in this network I could find, and as I note in the book, too, was in the early 1970s, where Epstein was inexplicably appearing at Jimmy Goldsmith's mansion when he wasn't even hired by the Dalton School yet. He got involved with the royal violinist Jacqueline Dupree, but he somehow got very close and allegedly accompanied her on piano for performances. That's alleged. This is after his trip to England when he was a college dropout backpacking through Europe and somehow ends up musically accompanying some very well-connected musician who Dupree, by the way, ended up marrying some Israeli, I forget, but he was friends. He was an Israeli, I think, musician, might have been a dancer. I can't remember because it's been a few years. But that's apparently how Itzhak Perlman, the famous musician, got connected with Epstein, was through that relationship. And then Epstein, when he had his cabin at the Interlaken camp, was basically supposedly had built that cabin for Itzhak Perlman's use. And now Itzhak Perlman's son is like running a major, he's like a top executive at a major crypto exchange. I think it's Binance. And was previously at Gemini and is doing, not strange things, but working for companies that I think are rather suspect personally. I really hope what people take away from my work is pointing out that it's a transnational oligarchy at the end of the day. It's, who do the state actors really work for? At the end of the day, like if Epstein was Israeli affiliated, what does that mean? Who's controlling the state of Israel? I think it's also possible, too, that Epstein was known to have been really talented in math and also music while he was a teen and high schooler. That's how he got a full scholarship to attend the Interlaken school when he was a teenager, for example. And it's very possible. So Donald Barr was also running in New York at the time that Epstein was in high school, one of these talented teen programs where they kind of they identify people who are talented and sort of pluck them out of high school and put them in, special programs or whatever. And in other parts of the world, like Israel, for example, they have the Talpiot program where they pick kids out of high school that are talented in math and science to put them on a fast track to high up positions in Unit 8200 and things like that. It's very possible that something like that happened there, considering that Donald Barr historically had ties to intelligence through his service in the OSS. And at the time he hired Epstein at the Dalton School, his son, William Barr, who we can talk about again later for obvious reasons, was working for the CIA and was involved then in stonewalling the Church Committee of Congress about, the information they were looking for from the CIA. He was part of that effort to prevent the release of more information than absolutely necessary from the CIA to Congress, right? So there's possible that there was something else there and that he was helped along that way and through connections. Ace Greenberg, it was a kind of, shady guy in some ways in and of themselves. A lot of these figures that I talk about in the book connected to Epstein, for example, are part of secret societies like B'nai B'rith, which is basically the Jewish equivalent of Freemasonry. So do they have, these little clubs and they're, backroom handshakes and I'm going to hire you for this and that, that kind of stuff is known to have happened in U.S. history on more than one occasion, right? So it's possible that Epstein's rise was related to that, because also Greenberg, after Epstein was at Bear Stearns, kind of took him under his wing and helped him climb up through the bank very quickly. And, he left in 1980, but before then he was advising the most elite clients of Bear Stearns on tax evasion type stuff. And the reason he was let go is allegedly because he was being questioned as part of this SEC investigation into insider trading involving the Bronfman family. So if Epstein were to have, the SEC was tipped off that Epstein knew something about it. Bronfman very well could have been a client of Bear Stearns at that time. But what's interesting too is that the legal counsel for Bear Stearns, right around the time all of this was happening, was actually Bill Casey, who just like a month or two later becomes CIA director for Reagan. Bill Casey died, I forget of what, but it was after, either right after or while the Iran-Contra hearings were going on. And Hank Greenberg is a longtime top funder of the CFR, right? And Epstein was also a major funder for a time of the CFR, and even after he was arrested in 07, 08, they didn't, they continued to take his money for a few years after that. And, as Hillary Clinton herself said, the CFR is the mothership. So, my thesis about Epstein in general is that he was working, obviously most overtly for Leslie Wexner, but Leslie Wexner himself is enmeshed with this group that becomes rather tight-knit later of oligarchs, really, these billionaires that all happen to have organized crime connections.
In this segment, Webb breaks down the organized crime roots of the American oligarchy, how secret societies and intelligence agencies have always served elite interests, and why the illusion of democracy is used to keep the public distracted. She shows how the same networks behind Epstein have shaped U.S. policy, finance, and even global events for decades, while the real players remain untouchable. This is the big picture the establishment doesn't want you to see.
There was a spy scandal in D.C., and the code name, it was a wiretap or something, I believe, of the Israeli embassy, and they were talking about getting information from someone whose code name was Mega, and so they were trying to look for like a mole in the government, and they didn't find one. And then their source, I think it was the Washington Post or some mainstream media outlet like that was reporting on it, and the Israeli they interviewed to sort of like explain away the scandal was Rafi Eitan, who had actually been Robert Maxwell's handler, and also Jonathan Pollard's handler for Israeli intelligence. But he was running a now defunct Israeli intelligence agency called Lakim that was mainly focused on science and technology espionage. And I forget exactly when it was shut down, but basically he was the one kind of trying to explain it away. And it's very interesting you would roll out such a controversial figure to be the person to explain it away. And I think if you look at Rafi Eitan's career of espionage against the United States alone, you can't really take his claims at face value at all. So the possibility, and I think it was first raised by Israel Shamir, writing for Executive Intelligence Review in like 2002, that the Mega Group and Mega were linked somehow, and positing that Mega was a code word for these billionaires. So as an example, the Crown family were members of the Mega Group with Wexner and the Bronfmans, and the Crowns are also linked to organized crime, but they're out of Chicago. And they built up, for example, what is now General Dynamics, a military contractor, but also along with Wexner banking interests, created the modern day JP Morgan and put Jamie Dimon in charge of it. Of course, JP Morgan later gets involved in facilitating Epstein banking criminality, but the Crowns were also one of the forces that led to Barack Obama's early political career. Right. I did, and how now Ghislaine Maxwell, who doesn't want to die like her father or like Epstein or like Jean-Luc Brunel, is being questioned by the DOJ and may testify and say certain things necessarily. But I think if you're Ghislaine Maxwell and a lot of people around you have been killed off, and you're in prison, I think she'll do anything to negotiate her release or a reduced sentence and say anything to further that and also not die. So we'll see what she says. But if I have to pick anything, that I think she may say, if it's not something made up, which is possible, but if she tells the truth about something, she'll just be asked ad nauseum about the Clintons and like Bill Gates and people like that, but not about anything that could be damaging for the modern day Republican Party, right? And as you know, my work tries to make very clear, you know, the rot is definitely 100% bipartisan. But the big giveaway here, because I saw a headline about how Hillary and Bill Clinton are going to be subpoenaed about their relationship with Ghislaine Maxwell now, as they're trying to distract away about how they're not going to release the files, which obviously have something bad for both parties in them. Otherwise, we would probably have them. But the big giveaway here about that, if the Clintons are subpoenaed and forced to testify or whatever, or if Ghislaine is asked about them, is that Republicans are not going to touch one very important aspect of the Epstein-Clinton relationship with a 10-foot pole, and that is Jeffrey Epstein's 17 visits to the Clinton White House between 1993 and 1995. They will not touch that. And there is a reason why mainstream media has worked so hard to have all the scandalous coverage of Epstein and Clinton be after Clinton left office. No focus on when he was in office. And the same is true also, I've argued in the past about Bill Gates, because they won't talk about his relationship with Epstein until he was no longer involved as chairman of Microsoft. So they want the pressure off of Microsoft. They want the pressure off of what was Epstein doing at the Clinton White House, because it's really, I would argue, ultimately boils down to what I see as sort of the second coming of Iran-Contra in the mid-90s, same network, involved with this very crazy effort that's remembered as Chinagate today, but it really has a lot to do with U.S. and Israeli intelligence, who, of course, were the bedfellows of Iran-Contra, and some of the connections they made to major Chinese weapons dealers and organized crime-like figures in Macau, and you know, weird things there that involved a lot of military technology transfer from the U.S. to China. Israel very involved in this, and it was even, you know, the CIA like acknowledged that in the early 90s. But nothing was done to really stop anything. And they don't really want to talk about that at all. Even though it involves China, it involves Clinton. You think it would be the perfect story for Trump, but no, they won't touch it. And I write a lot about it very extensively in my book, Chinagate, if you'd like more detail on why that would be so bad for both parties.
To watch the full interview, check the link in the description. Whitney Webb's research is a warning and a call to action. As long as we focus on partisan drama, the real predators keep getting away with it. The only way to fight back is to build local, resilient communities and economic structures that don't depend on the oligarchy. Share your thoughts. Do you believe the Epstein files will ever be released? How deep does the cover-up go? Like, subscribe, and share to help expose the truth.